I'd like to begin by thanking the Foundation's President, Josephine Chow, for inviting me to speak at this celebration of the Foundation's 30th anniversary. My topic today is the future of artificial intelligence. In 1936, in his early 20s, Alan Turing wrote a paper describing two new kinds of mathematical objects, machines and programs, that turned out to be the most powerful ever found, even more so than numbers. His 1950 paper on computing machinery and intelligence introduced many of the core ideas and subfields of AI, including machine learning. Perhaps less well known is a lecture he gave in 1951, in which he said this: "Once the machine thinking method had started, it would not take long to outstrip our feeble powers. At some stage, therefore, we should have to expect the machines to take control." Let me repeat that. At some stage, therefore, we should have to expect the machines to take control. Now, for most of the last 70 years, the AI community has paid no attention to Turing's prediction. But by 2013, during a sabbatical in Paris, I became convinced that the issue was possibly the most important question that we face. I gave a talk in London in which I stated that success in AI would be the biggest event in human history, and perhaps the last event in human history. In 2014, this sentence was included in an article published in the Huffington Post, which I co-authored along with physicists Max Tegmark, Frank Wilczek, and Stephen Hawking. From then on, I would be publicly committed to the view that success for my field of research would pose a risk to my own species. So what exactly does success in AI mean? To answer, I'll have to explain what AI is trying to do. Obviously, it's about making machines intelligent, but what does that mean? To answer this question, the field of AI borrowed from the long-established notion of rationality in economics and philosophy. Humans are intelligent to the extent that our actions can be expected to achieve our objectives. All those other characteristics of intelligence, perceiving, thinking, learning, inventing, listening to lectures, and so on, can be understood through their contributions to our ability to act successfully. From the very beginnings of AI, intelligence in machines has been defined in the same way. Machines are intelligent to the extent that their actions can be expected to achieve their objectives. That is, we build objective-achieving machines. We feed objectives into them, or we specialize them for particular objectives, and off they go. The same general plan applies in control theory, statistics, operations research, and economics. It's so pervasive, I'll call it the standard model. Operating within this model, AI has achieved many breakthroughs over the past 7 decades and has exceeded human capabilities in many specialized tasks. Methods developed in AI for causal and probabilistic reasoning have spread to nearly all branches of science and engineering. And in the last decade, AI systems have learned to drive cars safely, to defeat the human world Go champion, to recognize human speech very well, to recognize objects in images, to translate between hundreds of different human languages, and to solve the protein folding problem. AI is also increasingly important in the economy, running everything from search engines to autonomous delivery planes. At the same time, AI has produced or exacerbated racial and gender bias, disinformation, deepfakes, and cybercrime. Algorithms that can decide to kill human beings and have the physical means to do so are already for sale, leading to the prospect of cheap, scalable, easily proliferated weapons of mass destruction. All of these risks come from simple, narrow, application-specific algorithms. But let's be clear, the goal of AI is and always has been general-purpose AI. That is, machines that can quickly learn to perform well across the full range of tasks that humans can perform. Inevitably, general-purpose AI systems would far exceed human capabilities in many dimensions. This is an inflection point for civilization. Now, we are, I believe, a long way from achieving general-purpose AI. Furthermore, we cannot predict its arrival based on the growth of data and computing power. Running stupid algorithms on faster computers just gives you the wrong answer more quickly. Also, I think it's highly unlikely that the present obsession with deep learning will yield the progress its adherents imagine. Several conceptual breakthroughs are still needed, and those are very hard to predict. it's quite unlikely we'll succeed in the next few years. It seems prudent, nonetheless, to prepare for the eventuality. If all goes well, it will herald a golden age for humanity. Our civilization is the result of our intelligence, and having access to much greater intelligence could enable a much better civilization. One rather prosaic goal is to use general-purpose AI to do what we already know how to do more effectively, at far less cost and at far greater scale. Everything as a service, or XaaS. We could, for example, raise the living standard of everyone on Earth in a sustainable way to a respectable level. That amounts to a roughly tenfold increase in global GDP. The cash equivalent, or the net present value as economists call it, of the increased income stream is about $14 quadrillion. Now that's all fine if everything goes well, although there is the question of what's left for us humans to do. On the other hand, as Alan Turing warned, in creating general-purpose AI, we create entities that are far more powerful than humans. Would that necessarily be the last event in human history? Surely we need to understand why success in AI could lead to failure for humanity. Many films, such as Terminator and Ex Machina, would have you believe that spooky emergent consciousness is the problem. Not at all. It makes absolutely no difference. It's competence, not consciousness, that matters. To understand the real problem with making AI better, we have to re-examine the very foundations of AI, the standard model, which says that machines are intelligent to the extent that their actions can be expected to achieve their objectives. For example, you tell a self-driving car, "Take me to the airport," and the car adopts the destination as its objective. It's not something that the AI system figures out for itself. It's something that we specify. And this is how we build all AI systems today. Now, the problem is that when we move out of the lab and into the real world, we find that we are unable to specify these objectives completely and correctly. In fact, even defining the other objectives of self-driving cars, such as how to balance speed, safety, legality, comfort, and politeness, has turned out to be extraordinarily difficult. This should not be a surprise. We've known it for thousands of years. For example, suppose a genie grants you 3 wishes. What is your third wish? It's always, "Please undo the first wishes because I've ruined the world." Now, talking of ruining the world, let's look at social media content selection algorithms, the ones that choose items for your news feed or the next video to watch. They aren't particularly intelligent, but they have more power over people's cognitive intake than any dictator in history. The algorithm's objective is usually to maximize click-through, the probability that the user clicks on presented items. The designers thought, perhaps, that the algorithm would learn to send items that the user likes, but the algorithm had other ideas. Like any rational entity, it learns how to modify the state of its environment, in this case, the user's mind, in order to maximize its long-term reward by making the user more predictable. A more predictable user can be fed items that they are more likely to click on, thereby generating more revenue. And users with more extreme preferences seem to be more predictable. And we see the consequences of growing extremism all over the world. So with the standard model and misspecified objectives, better AI systems seem to produce worse outcomes. A more capable AI system will make a much bigger mess of the world in order to achieve its incorrectly specified objective, and it will do a much better job of blocking human attempts to interfere. In a sense, then, we're setting up a go match between ourselves and the machines, with the fate of the world as the prize. You do not want to be in that match. Now, you might say, let's do a better job of defining the objectives. But our repeated failures, even in simple cases, suggests that there is little chance we can completely and correctly specify the full objective, the one that matters, that is, humanity's ranking of all possible futures. Another option might be to ban AI altogether. In Frank Herbert's Dune, the Butlerian jihad has been fought to save humanity from machine control, and now there is an 11th commandment: "Thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of a human mind." But then I imagine all those corporations and countries with their eyes on that $14 quadrillion prize, and I think, good luck with that. The right answer is that if making AI better makes the problem worse, then we've got the whole thing wrong. Specifically, the idea of machines pursuing fixed, known objectives won't work. Instead, we have to build AI systems that know they don't know the true objective, even though it's what they must pursue. This turns out to be the key idea for attaining control over machines. It can be expressed in the form of 3 simple principles. The first principle is that the machine's only objective is to maximize the realization of human preferences. So the machine will be purely altruistic towards humans with no objectives of its own, not even self-preservation. The word preferences here means preferences over entire futures, everything we care about. The second principle is that the machine is initially uncertain about what those preferences are. This is the core of the new approach. We remove the false assumption that the machine is pursuing a fixed objective that is perfectly known. This principle is what gives us control, for reasons that will become clear soon. The third principle is that the ultimate source of information about human preferences is human behavior. Here, behavior means everything we do, which includes everything we say, as well as everything we don't do, such as not reading your email during the lecture. It also includes the entire written record, most of which is about humans doing things. This principle grounds the meaning of the preferences referred to in the first 2 principles, but it's not straightforward. For all sorts of reasons, our actions may not perfectly reflect our underlying preferences. I'll say more about this later. I also want to reinforce the obvious point that we may all have different preferences, all 8 billion of us in all our glorious variety. Now, these 3 principles can be turned into a mathematical framework called an assistance game. It's a game, a term borrowed from game theory in economics, because there are always 2 or more decision-making entities involved, at least one human and at least one robot. It's an assistance game because the robot's payoff, what it wants to maximize in the game, is the human's payoff, but only the human knows what it is. Of course, the robot can learn more during the game. Now, perhaps an example will make this clear. You are the robot. Your partner is the human, and you have to buy your partner the perfect birthday present using money from the joint account. Your payoff in this game is precisely your partner's happiness with the present. Now, this particular case is known to be unsolvable, but in all other cases, we can set up instances of assistance games and solve them, which means calculating how the human and the robot should behave. The key property of assistance games is that if the AI system solves the game, the results will be provably beneficial to humans. If all goes well, this will soon be what people mean by building a good AI system. AI researchers won't need insufferable ethicists wagging their fingers at them anymore. Furthermore, the human in the game has an incentive to teach the robot about their preferences, and the robot defers to the human. It asks permission before carrying out any plan that might violate some unknown preferences. We can also prove in a general sense that the machine will act in a minimally invasive way, trying to change only those things it's already sure that we want changed and not messing with the rest. This is really important because the machine will always have a large amount of uncertainty about our true preferences. Perhaps the most important result is that the machine will always allow us to switch it off. This is the key to the control problem. Whereas an AI system in the standard model will almost never allow itself to be switched off because that would guarantee failure in achieving the objective. An AI system in the new model wants to be switched off if humans desire it, so that it avoids doing whatever is giving humans a reason to switch it off. Now, as we move beyond the basic 2-player assistance game, we immediately face the question, how should the machine decide when its actions affect more than one person? This is a question that moral philosophers and political theorists have studied for thousands of years. Obviously, with more than one person, the machine needs to make trade-offs. For example, a utilitarian moral philosopher would, roughly speaking, weigh the preferences of everyone equally and maximize their sum. That sounds straightforward enough, but sometimes it's fraught with difficulty, especially when weighing decisions that affect who will exist in the future. In the movie Avengers: Infinity War, for example, Thanos develops and implements the theory that if there were half as many people, everyone who remained would be more than twice as happy. This is the kind of naive calculation that gives utilitarianism a bad name. The Financial Times review of the movie was a learned disquisition called "Thanos Shows Us How Not to Be an Economist." Meanwhile, on Reddit, there was, of course, a subgroup called "Thanos Did Nothing Wrong," but they kept purging half their members, so it didn't last long. I bring up this example to make the point that these issues are not merely, if that's the right word, philosophical. They really matter, and we must get them right as AI systems approach Thanos levels of power. Now, in addition to dealing with many humans, AI must also deal with real humans, which is particularly relevant to the third principle, how machines learn about human preferences from human behavior. As I said earlier, our actions may not perfectly reflect our underlying preferences. So inferring preferences from behavior is far from easy. We are myopic, computationally limited, and emotional, leading in many cases to choices we regret. But the biggest challenge is the plasticity of human preferences, the fact that they can change due to external influences. First, there is a practical problem of ensuring that machines don't mold our preferences to be easier to satisfy, as happens with social media. Second, there is an unsolved philosophical problem. If the machine is deciding now to do something for you that will take effect tomorrow, who is it working for? Today's you or tomorrow's you? Finally, the principles implicitly assume that humans are the autonomous possessors of their own preferences. It's a reasonable starting point, but it's not valid in the long run. Amartya Sen, the great economist and philosopher, emphasized that an oppressive society molds the preferences of individuals so that they accept or even welcome their oppression. Therefore, it may not be appropriate for the machine to take all preferences at face value. So should AI systems be in the business of molding human preferences in better directions, whatever that means? Possibly, but that's a place where even the angels fear to tread. To close my lecture, I'd like to bring up the nature of our coexistence with AI, assuming that we have solved the control problem and developed general-purpose, provably beneficial AI. One possibility is that an increasing dependence on AI leads us to become enfeebled or even infantilized, like the humans in the film Wall-E. The human race has spent roughly 1 trillion person years just passing on what we know to the next generation through thousands of generations to keep our civilization alive and growing. What happens when that is no longer necessary? The answer is that our future AI systems must and will learn to stand back, as parents do, eventually to say, "No, I'm not tying your shoelaces. You must do it yourself." They will do this because human autonomy is a fundamental value. They will not create the Wall-E world unless we force them to. But the parent-child relationship is not the right metaphor because we, the children in this case, will have all the power, even though the machines will in fact be far more powerful. We need a new metaphor, a new way of seeing ourselves, and we'll need all the writers and filmmakers and poets to guide our culture in the process. Thank you.